Hi guys, so I picked a super easy sentence for this week because I wanted our focus to be less on the grammar and more so on our punctuation for our dialogue. And so dialogue, as a reminder, is anything that's a quote from a character. And usually dialogue isn't just one statement, it's usually one character talking to another one. So in our personal narratives or inside novels that we read or picture books, dialogue is usually one quote that a character says and then somebody responds and it goes back and forth, whether it's just 2 times or quite a few times. And punctuating dialogue can be one of the absolute trickiest skills to learn. So I really want you guys to dig in this year and try to get this handled fast so that we don't have to spend too much time going back over it over and over and over and over again. So the book that we're reading this week, actually I'm having Miss Jordan read it this week, is called One Grain of Rice. And the sentence says, "I am not a thief," Ronnie replied. And 2 notes are going to be are going to be placed inside your ELA binders under the grammar notes section. This one that says punctuating dialogue, and this other one that says punctuating dialogue. So I picked them both for various reasons. So the first one, I feel like these can really help us with like the basics, and then this can get a little more detailed for us. So for instance, it says that rule number 1 of punctuating dialogue is to put a comma before or after the word that tells you that people are talking. So in this case, the phrase that's being said out loud is, "I am not a thief." And this comma is going to help separate what the character says to this, and this is called a tag. So it has a name and their action. So we're going to highlight this comma yellow. If you don't have a highlighter, please just use a crayon or a marker. But on my notes it said comma. We need to have a comma every time we're punctuating dialogue. And so the second rule says to put quotation marks before the first word someone says and then after the punctuation mark. So it depends on the sentence. So our punctuation mark we're going to have in a separate spot. It really depends on where your tags are in the sentence. So these notes are going to help us, but not perfectly. So our quotation marks are always going to be before that first word that the person says, so I am, and then at the very end of what they say out loud, "I am not a thief." And then here's our other quotation mark. So it needs to be at the beginning and at the end. Ronnie replied is not something that somebody's saying out loud, so it does not need to be inside the quotation marks. All right, but there is some punctuation at the end of the very sentence, and that's right here. So we're going to highlight that pink for our punctuation. Sometimes we can punctuate that a little differently. So sometimes there might be a comma after that. Like if this was in front, it would have a comma after, and then thief would have maybe an exclamation point or a period instead. That's just going to be a different situation where there's a different type of tag. Okay, but the rules also say to capitalize the first word that someone is saying. So what's being said in this phrase is "I." And it's capitalized. Well, I should always be capitalized. We talked about that last week. But make sure that that word is capitalized. So those are the colors that we have. With our punctuating dialogue rules, we have here 3 different versions. So we can have the speech tag at the front, like Sue asked, "Do you want to go play soccer?" Bob screamed, "That would be amazing." Sue said, "Let's play at the park." Do you see how the speech tags are all at the front, front, front? And these have different types of punctuation. This one has a question mark, that one has an exclamation mark, and this one has a period. We can also have the speech tag at the back. I'm sorry, the teachers are being a little loud. Let me go close the door. Sorry guys, that happened last week too, but last week it was after school. Okay, so here it says, "Do you want to eat lunch?" Sarah asked. I am so hungry, Sam screamed. I made eggs and bacon, Sarah said. So do you see instead the tags are at the end, instead of the beginning. And so these quotes are right here. Speech tag can also be in the middle, where it splits up the sentence. Do you know, Summer asked, when we are going bowling? It's finally time, Stacy screamed, to go bowling. I wasn't really sure, Summer said, if we could make it. I don't necessarily love the places that these sentences are, but they're all there. And then I wrote some of our own. We have these fixed with proofreading marks, but our speech tag in the front says, Mrs. Phillips cheered, my students are so amazing. And that is true because you guys are the bomb. I love you guys so much. All right, speech tag in the middle. Today's student of the week is, Mrs. Jordan said, Miggy. So, there you go. It's Miggy. All right, and speech tag at the end. Why do you love being an IMA? Asked Mr. Krytel. So let's use our skills to use our highlights. So we have speech tag in the front. We've got our quotation marks before and after the sentence. Here we do with, we've also got our comma right before the sentence starts. So it says Sue asked, and then that comma is leading into the statement saying, oh, somebody's about to say something. All right, they have punctuation at the end, and that punctuation should go before the end of the quotation mark. And then it's also, oh man, I accidentally messed up the colors. This one was supposed to be pink. Okay, because the capitalization came right here where we said do. Okay, so let's keep looking at this. We're going to keep highlighting these patterns that we're seeing. So Bob screamed, oop, there's our comma, right before somebody says something out loud. And then we have our quotation marks right before he starts talking and right at the end of the talking. But there is some punctuation before the quotation marks end. And we capitalized the first word that he said. And right here, Sue said, oop, there's the comma, warning you that it's coming. We have quotation mark at the beginning of the sentence that somebody says out loud, and quotation mark after they're done. We have punctuation, and we also capitalize it. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So here, the statement starts at the beginning. Do you want to eat lunch? Then they end that, and it says Sarah asked. We had it capitalized. There is some punctuation right here before the end of the quotation marks. And actually, that's all we need. We don't have a comma on this one. So with an exclamation point, we have, I'm so hungry, in that phrase. We capitalized it, and we made sure we had our punctuation. Just make sure you don't forget the punctuation at the end either, because you shouldn't just have nothing at the end. There should always be something at the end. Then last one, for periods, you would actually, this is a weird rule. So when you have a period and the speech tag is at the back, it's going to end in a comma right here. You're not going to put the period yet. The period comes later. So we're going to have our quotation mark right here. And at the end of bacon, we capitalized that statement. And we're going to have our comma right before we end our phrase. The actual period goes at the very end of the sentence. That's one of the weirdest rules. Sorry, it's just one of those things you gotta learn. I hope I was showing you this, because now I realize maybe you guys weren't seeing any of that. That would stink. Okay. All right, and if it's in the middle, I'm trying to hurry. This is gonna be a super long video. We've got quotation mark before and after. Summer asked, oops, somebody's gonna say, when are we going bowling? Before and after. We capitalized the do. We have our comma right here before it goes into the tag. Summer asked. There's also a comma right here before the next statement starts. When are we going bowling? We have to punctuate the end. There we go. We have our quotation mark. Is it finally time? Stacy screamed at the tag to go bowling. We capitalized it. And we need to make sure that before we get into our tag, we have our comma. It says Stacy screamed. Before we get into our quote, we have a comma. So the commas are really helping break it down, like, oh, end of a quote. Oh, somebody's about to talk. Then there's also punctuation at the end of that phrase, bowling. Right here, we have quotation marks. I wasn't really sure, Summer said, if we would make it. Okay, I is capitalized. We have our comma at the end of the statement before the tag. We have the tag, and then there's a comma leading into the next quote. And then we've got to end our sentence with our punctuation. That punctuation's before the quotation mark. So hopefully we're really starting to see where these things are going. I know it's complicated. I know it's hard, but we got this. And my sentences, I feel like, are a little easier. So Mrs. Phillips cheered. We have our comma leading right before the quote. My students are so amazing. So we have our quotation mark right before I say my students, and then at the end, after so amazing, I need to have it capitalized. The my is capitalized, and then there's punctuation at the end. All right, with the tag in the middle, I start talking, or Miss Jordan starts talking right away. Today's student of the week is, that's the end of what she says. There is a comma right before it ends to get into the tag. Mrs. Jordan said, and then she's about to say another quote, so it's like, here she goes, she's about to talk again. She also says, Miggy. We capitalized today, and we have punctuation at the end. And last one says, why do you love being an IMA? Asked Mr. Cartel. He says, why do you love being an IMA? Quotation mark, quotation mark. It is capitalized at the beginning of his quote. There is punctuation at the end of his quote, and there's punctuation at the end of the sentence. All right, so I know it's tricky, but we got this. So what do you guys think? Do those match up pretty well? Make sure that those notes go into your grammar notes binder. This is a skill we've got to build. It's something that's hard and a lot of people struggle with, so every time we work on it, go for it. All right, we're already 13 minutes into the video. Let's hurry it on up. Okay, so it says, I am not a thief, Ronnie replied. So I is a word that's replacing her name, which is Ronnie. Ronnie is a proper noun because it's capitalized. It's a special name of a person. But I, because it replaces her name and says Ronnie is not a thief, we're going to call that a pronoun. Okay, and am is a verb. It's a state of being. It's a little more complicated than the average verb. It's an action, though. It's just what somebody is. Not actually is a word that is describing am. They are not. So this is not an adjective, though, because an adjective describes a noun. This is describing a verb, so this is called an adverb. Then we have the word a, which is an article. We just have to memorize those three. It's a, an, and the. Thief is a thing. It's a person, so that is a noun. And then Ronnie replied, that's an action. So it's a verb, and it's an ed, so that means it's past tense verb. Okay, the type of sentence, it has a comma right here and a period right here. So that means it's just a regular statement. That's not a demand that somebody's making. So we are going to just call this a declarative sentence. The sentence structure, even though this is a quote, it's pretty simple. There's not a lot going on. There's one subject and one predicate for the actual statement that the person is saying, and here. So it just happens to be, it's a simple sentence. There's just a quote and a tag to it. So let's say I is the subject of this, and the action that they're doing is am. Technically not, I'm not. So we'll add that little addition there. And then the noun right here is Ronnie. And Ronnie's action that they did was replied. All right, guys, we did it. 15 minutes long. Sorry it's a little long, but we really needed to work on those punctuating dialogue skills. Bye.